It's action adventure. It's getting in and out of situations quickly. It's giving your readers characters that they can relate to.
Welcome back to the Men's Adventure Fiction Podcast. I'm Nathaniel Hummel. We're so happy to have you guys here. We're having a great time. We love doing this. Thank you guys for joining us and watching, and thanks for leaving really great comments that inspire a lot of discussion. I know Luke and I look forward to doing this every single week, and it's good to see you, Luke. How are you doing, my friend?
Good. I also agree that the comments are helpful and inspiring, and the Discord is helpful. When I don't want to write, it gets me a little bit more pressure to actually get up and produce and use that pulp work ethic. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
so
man.
It's been great. And we're here with truly, this is an honor of a guest to have, Charles F. Millhouse. This is kind of, you were my intro into the new pulp world, and I was kind of off to the races after I read Captain Hochland and then found out about Pulp Fest, and it was all through you. And I absolutely love what you're doing with these characters. Zane Carrington was in the first Captain Hochland book I read, and then he got his own kind of short story here that you produced. This was one of my favorite summer reads so far. I love this thing. So
Good.
I'm becoming more of a Zane Carrington fan every day. I wanted to ask you first and foremost, kind of what was your intro into the pulp world, and kind of what was that journey like to get you into this genre?
I come from a generation where a lot of the 1930s and 40s cliffhanger serials were played on PBS in a show called Matinee at the Bijou. So I started watching those at a real young age, and got enthralled with the cliffhanger action. And is your hero going to survive at the end? And then, of course, you had to come back the next week. Even back in the day, you had to wait for a week to come back to see what would happen.
Right.
So that was my first introduction to it. And then it wasn't until probably the early 80s, after the Indiana Jones Raiders of the Lost Ark came out, and then I started discovering all the pulp stuff, the Shadow and the Spider and Doc Savage, of course. And that's when I just started immersing myself into it. Comic books and pulp stuff, just in general, just digging myself through it. And my dad, of course, grew up in that era, so he would give me all kinds of, tell me what I should read and what I should look for, and he would go on book hunts with me and stuff. So
it's good to have that kind of mentor figure, especially then, bringing you into the fold, because now I'm I'm able to Google things and look that way. But before, I bet it was a lot of talking to people at comic shops, word of mouth, figuring out that. And I'm curious, what was your favorite character growing up? Would you say, pulp figure that you read most often?
Probably the Shadow.
Shadow, nice.
Yeah,
very cool.
Just anything I could. Comic books, because they did in the 70s. DC did a series, and that's what really got me into that. And then I started picking up the pulp stuff, and I still slowly picking up the pulp stuff now. I just actually picked one up at Pulp Fest last month.
Very cool.
Yeah. Okay.
That's so neat that this pulp stuff is kind of a family affair for you, because that kind of plays out in Captain Hochland, with his relationship with his dad and how that all kind of ties in, which is very cool. Now, you mentioned the pulp serials and on TV. Is there any of those specifically that you remember by name that really kind of stuck with you? I know there are thousands of those, so if you can't think of anything, that's fine.
Flying Devil Dogs is one of my favorites.
Okay, very cool.
The title of it eludes me, but it's a Gene Autry.
Nice.
It was his very first film. It was a 12-part story. I can't remember. Somebody's probably watching this, shouting at the screen right now.
Oh, it's not me.
But it was all underground. It was an underground. Matter of fact, I wrote Captain Hochland and the Subterranean Empire, and I kind of loosely based it on that Gene Autry serial.
Man, that's so cool.
Yeah,
that's so awesome to, first of all, have such a classic pulp character in Captain Hawkland and the gang, but then to also know that it is like inspired by these and holds these as like, I don't know if the sacred text is the right word, but kind of just like this is something that's gone before that is such a prime example of this, and now you're continuing that legacy on today. So very impressive.
I think a lot of new pulp authors, writers, they are carrying the torch from the classic stuff, and we want to continue that on, but we also want to pay homage to what had come before and not soil that in any way.
Right. I know that's super important to Luke and I. That's one of the reasons why we started this podcast, is because those stories, it's just crazy that they held such an important place in American literature for so long, and now they've just all but faded away. So it's people like you who are carrying that on, and like you said, paying respect to those people and kind of keeping that legacy alive. So thank you for what you're doing.
I appreciate it. I talk to a lot of younger people. I work at a university here in Athens, Ohio, and I work with a lot of younger people, and they ask me what I write, and I tell them new pulp, and they don't understand what pulp is. So I go through the whole story of how the whole pulp thing began, and they get really interested in it too. So, and some of the boys who work for me in my kitchen, they have picked up some of my stuff to read it. So
that's so cool.
It is interesting that like pulps, I don't know, like it seemed to be, it had like this grip on culture, and the way that's faded. Me and Nathaniel were kind of talking the other day. Would the stuff that's coming out today in the thriller genre, is it a marketing thing? Like, would it have been considered pulp back then? Like, what is your take on where thriller ends and pulp begins? Like, what is there that differentiates some of these stories?
I think a lot of the thriller stuff that's done now, or a friend of mine, Bobby Nash, writes mysteries, but still has that pulp flavor to it.
Yeah.
I think a lot of it today could fall in that genre. There is the aspect of marketing, and the big publishers are all about looking for money. They actually did James Patterson did a new version of The Shadow, which in my humble opinion was not that good, because he moved it all into modern day, which can work because Howard Chaykin did a Shadow comic book, a 12-issue comic book series in the 80s, where he set the Shadow in the 1980s, and it actually worked really well.
Right.
But a lot of the stuff that's being written now, I think they've done a Son of Doc Savage. James Patterson's written it, and of course, James Patterson doesn't write a lot of his stuff anymore. He ghost writes it out, so he sticks his name on it, and there's where the marketing aspect of it comes in. But there are some things coming out now. I think I read not too long ago a book called Matterhorn, and that was really good, and that was really pulpy to me.
I agree. I read that over the summer. I'm thinking of the same book, right? It was about like the mountain climber and his son goes missing, like the first chapter. Yeah, that was awesome.
Yeah,
and like you said, very fast-paced action. Kind of reminded me of the Eiger Sanction with Clint Eastwood a little bit. Like, it was fun. It was a great read, and
that sounds like a good one.
Yeah, you should check it out, Nathaniel. It's good. It's but it's same thing. Like, if you almost put a pulp art style on the front and like marketed it that way, I could see that fitting into that genre. So it's, as a pulp fan, I wish more books had that art, but publishers must not like that. Publishers must not be into it.
Yeah. When you pitch the art for these covers, how do you kind of describe it? Do you have like, is it just like a lookbook more or less of other pulp art, or do you have kind of an idea that you pitch to your artist and then they just make it happen? What's the process there?
Well, more recently, my artist is Jeffrey Hayes, who his small little company is called Plasma Fire Graphics. And he's the one that did the Zane Carrington cover. And actually, he did the Zane Carrington, the Night Vision, and the Purple Mystique. And the Captain Hawkins. He's done a lot of work for me in the past couple of years. He came to me, which I thought he was a little bit out of my league, and But he came to me wanting to work on a pulp thing pulp reality magazine that I was putting together, and we just kind of hit it off. So a lot of times I give him the idea of my story. He'll come back and ask a lot of questions. Sometimes when he gets a grasp on a character, like Evolution Man, because basically I pitched it to him as there's the old TV series, The $6 Million Man,
Mm-hmm.
and I said, this is my love letter to the $6 Million Man, and he kind of just went with it. He actually did the cover for the first book before I even laid down the first word in the first chapter.
Whoa.
But I used that cover every time I'd stall in my writing. I would stop and just look at that cover, and just it would help me push forward with the writing process. So a lot of times I'll give him free reign. I'll say, this is what I want, and just go for it. And he'll give me ideas, and he'll do some preliminary sketches and send them to me. And if I like it, we continue on. So. And I've used other artists that basically the same way. I say, this is my idea, and I try to go towards artists that do more pulp kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
Clayton Merwin is another one. He did the original Zane Carrington sketch for Pulp Reality, which I told him I wanted to look like Billy Zane. So he sat down and drew me a Billy Zane Carrington character.
Fantastic.
I actually took that to Billy Zane at a convention to let him look at it.
Oh, that's awesome.
That's awesome.
Like that. So yeah.
Yeah, the artwork is so important. I think that's what caught my eye when I was looking at like modern pulp, and I found out about Captain Hawkland online somewhere, and I was like, I think it was this one, the Ghost Army. Like this just caught my attention so much, and I was so into the picture. I was like, I have to read this.
That's a Clayton Merwin art right there on the front. So
I love that. It's just the tough guy look on Captain Hogwarts' face. It was what got me. And then the background is like got a lot of detail, and you should see that world coming alive. It just has that almost like Uncharted. Nathaniel, I know you're a fan of that. It reminds me of like just an adventure story that I had to get my hands on.
Right, and you can tell, like, you can see that it's its own thing 100%, but it does have so many great nods and great little, like, just attention to other things that have come before it. So you're doing a really good job in bridging that gap, like we've already talked about. And one of the things that I really like about Captain Hawkland, and it's something that me and Luke have talked before, that as new pulp writers, as men's adventure fiction authors, it's our responsibility to kind of like even take this genre a little further, because they've done so much groundwork already, but then it all faded away for some reason. So it'll be cool. It's like kind of our passion to add, not necessarily like change the formula or anything like that, but to add a little more reality to some of these things that were kind of out there, which is something that you do so well with Captain Hawkland. Obviously, in like any sort of noir or adventure story, the character, maybe 50% of the time, he's just an alcoholic because he can't process all of the challenging things that he's gone through. But that's what's really cool about Captain Hawkland, is like, I don't think there's ever been a pulp character before who talks like you talk about his anxiety and the stressors that he feels and having to control his fear. Whereas most pulp, I feel like, is, oh, this is just like a heartless man of steel, right? Like he doesn't really feel fear, or if he does, he definitely doesn't talk about it, or we don't get that insight into him. Even one of my favorite characters of all time, Chester Drum, he'll only ever talk about like, I wasn't sure I was going to make it after he's made it through. It's never like, it's somehow he skips like being afraid right when he's about to go up against like a 300-pound Russian nutso who's just absolutely jacked out of his mind. He's like, I'll worry about that later. So I think that that's really cool about Captain Hawkland. It's like, yeah, this is a real dude. He doesn't have this kind of like Superman thing going on where he has no emotion. So very well done with that.
He makes mistakes, and he's got to figure out how to fix them from the mistakes he makes. When I was at Pulp Fest, I had a customer come up and who had read Captain Hawkland before and bought the Captain Hawkland at War, and he said out loud at Pulp Fest, I think this character is better than Doc Savage. And somebody behind him went, whoa, wait a minute. And I went, uh-oh. He goes, no, I said, Doc Savage is great. And I think Doc Savage is great. There's a lot of Doc Savage in Captain Hawkland, but where he was trying to say that where Doc Savage really has no flaws, and the
Mm-hmm.
law bend down to him and pat him on the back. Where Captain Hawkland is not that kind of guy, and the law sometimes gives him a little bit of a hassle when he's trying to solve his problem. So I try to. It's all about, to me, when I write, it's all about characters. It's about character development and moving these characters forward. Stephen, Hardy, and Oz are friends, but yes, they also have a lot of internal problems with their friendship. In one of the books, The Invisible Enemy, Captain Hawkins going through a really bad time and turns to the bottle, and um, Hardy, and Oz have a falling out. But luckily, they will, eventually patch it up. But they got to get through the story to do that.
Yeah.
But I could add a lot of as much realism to the characters as I can.
Right. Well, even in
Definitely.
go ahead, Luke.
I was gonna say that's what drew me to it as well. Is as a counseling background and in my writing, I love character. Like that is what I want to drive my stories always. I love character studies. I love character dramas, and I love character-driven action. So when Captain Hawkland, exactly like you said, wasn't Doc Savage, where Doc Savage, you can almost laugh at all the amazing, like when you look at his feats and what he's able to do, and he's basically like Superman without being Superman. And well, yeah, being able to read Captain Hawkland and see those more subtle, like human aspects. And Zane Carrington, same thing, like you said, makes mistakes, has fear, can't always win, has to either think when use his mind to get out of a situation or come back to it from a different angle. I love that. I think that's what adds so much tension and so much buy-in from me as the reader of like, yeah, I'm invested because I can see a little bit of myself in this character.
Mm-hmm.
I love that aspect. So also just want to give you kudos for that. Character driven pulps, I think that's your thing and you're great at it.
When I started to write Zane Carrington, I created Zane Carrington before Captain Hawkland. He was going to have a series, and I
Very cool.
couldn't get a hold of the character. I couldn't find the right story. Things weren't gelling. And then I thought, this is a lot like Magnum PI, where he's telling the story, or a lot like Jake Cutter from Tales of the Go Monkey, who tells the story. So I decided I'm going to write this in first person and have him tell the reader the story. So he's sitting down with you, telling you about his adventure. And I had to read a lot of first person stuff to get a hold of that because I had never written a lot of it. And I read a lot of Jim Butcher, who wrote the Dresden File books, who, in my opinion, is the master of writing first person prose um, from a character's point of view. And I think I'm getting a handle on it, but I still need a lot of work on it, I think. But I'm getting there.
Yeah, I love. I haven't gotten to read Zane Carrington yet, but I'm super excited. First of all, we could talk for the rest of the episode about that cover art. It's just
Yeah.
it's to die for. It's so good.
Coolest cover.
I wish I could get like a big blow up of it and have it as a poster. It's so sick. But I I have this like for the longest time I had a really hard time with first person narratives, and it's because if they're not done well, they fall flat. But when they're done well, it is possibly the best form of writing. And
I agree.
um, my three of my favorite literary characters are Matt Helm, Chester Drum, and Shel Scott, and all three of those are written from a first person narrative. And I had I guess the privilege is what I would say, of listening to a lot of the audiobooks for Matt Helm and Shel Scott, and the voice actors, the readers for those did a really really good job at bringing those characters to life. And so you do get you're talking about Magnum. It's a perfect example of it, right? The whenever he says, "I know what you're thinking," or "Stop looking at the dogs, watch the lockpicks." It's so cool to pull you into the mind of this character, and it really does invest you because it also feeds a part of you that's like, I'm reading this now, and now I'm literally the main character to some degree, right? Like I'm reading it as a first person, and so it gives you that more like scratching that itch of being an adventurer. So I can't wait to read Zane Carrington.
Great, great.
Yeah, my dad brought that same point up of he was like, when I read a book, what I like in the action scenes is like I know a fight scene's gonna happen, cool, but I like when a writer, like the author, can kind of show you the thought process behind the guy. And you see a lot of that with Zane Carrington. Like when you can see them thinking out what's going to happen and thinking about what could go wrong and just watching them do. I mean, Jack Reacher does that really well, as like a modern person who does that.
Yeah.
And yeah, that, like you said, Nathaniel, kind of makes you feel a little bit cooler. You're like, ah, yes, now I know that. I also thought that I should take his knees out. You know what I mean? Like
That's what I was thinking the whole time.
Right. I was thinking that too, Chester Drum.
Yeah.
I wanted to take a minute too, Charles, because I know Captain Hockland and Zane Carrington pretty well, but you write a lot. Like, you're a prolific guy. And Stormgate Press, can you tell those watching, like, just the overview of all your series and like things to check out from you? And this will also inform me like what I should be picking up, because I know it goes beyond Captain Hockland. We're giving him and Zane Carrington a lot of attention, but you have a lot of series that you're working with.
I have a lot of ideas, and then I start writing them, and I'm going, oh no, now I'm writing 6 different series, and how I'm going to do this. I started publishing in 1999, long before print on demand or social media or the internet for that matter. And there was vanity press, so you had to pay somebody, boatloads of money to publish your book, and then it went nowhere. Your mom would buy a copy, and that would be about it. It wasn't until print on demand that really took off that I just went for it. So besides Captain Hockland, Zane Carrington, I've mentioned Evolution Man, and he's loosely based on the $6 Million Man. He's a thrill seeker. He loves to take thrills with his life. And while he's climbing El Capitan in California, he falls. And if his mother wouldn't have been a renowned scientist working on nanite technology, he would have died. But she injected him with nanites and turned him into basically the next evolution of man, a superhero, basically. But he ends up becoming a government spy. And it's set. The first book set in 1975. The second book set in 1976. So I have stories up through 1980.
Wow.
That's awesome.
So that's one of them. And then I have somewhere. I have the Pulp Reality. This is an anthology magazine style.
Cool.
There are anywhere between 5 to 8 stories in each issue. This is number 4. Number 5's coming out sometime after the first of the year, which will be the last in this series. We've got some other anthologies I'm going to work up, because writers like Brian K. Morris are in this, Bobby Nash, Clyde Hall, Ron Fortier has done one, John C. Bruning, all kinds of different writers and artists. I have art that goes through the entire book. So
that's so cool.
That's amazing.
And then hang on.
But wait, there's more.
This is crazy. This is so impressive.
That's why he's the man.
This is the New Kingdom Western. This is a supernatural Western. This is book 2 and 3. Book 1's around here somewhere. It's about Caleb Johnson, who gets released from the Yuma Territorial Prison, and he's on his way home to Kentucky. And he's passing through Nebraska, and he finds an Indian maiden who's being attacked by vampires. But he doesn't know what vampires are, but he is able to save her life and takes her home to New Kingdom, Nebraska. And when he gets there, he finds it's a hub of activity for supernatural creatures. The deputy sheriff is a werewolf. The school teacher is a ghost. There is a demon living inside the foundry, and so he ends up getting, and it's a trilogy. And I've had people tell me, "Is there going to be more?" I said, "Yes, there is more ideas for the character." But I just haven't gotten around to writing them yet. But there is a trilogy. So cool. And then science fiction wise,
absolute legend.
How many books does he have?
I've written about 40 books now so far.
That's so impressive.
That's incredible.
It's my version of a female Han Solo, basically.
Okay.
Oh, very cool.
It's written in third person, but it's all from her point of view. So I don't leave her point of view at all through the entire book. So you don't find out what's going to happen until she finds out what's going to happen.
Nice.
And I have really had a good time writing this book. But when it comes right down to it, my pulp stuff, Talon's Epic. This is my Stranger in a Strange Land, sort of like John Carter of Mars.
Oh,
It's
cool.
it's about an 18th century naval officer, British naval officer, who's abducted by aliens and taken into space and asked for them to help fight a war and use his primitive fighting techniques to help fight a war.
Wow,
And there's
that's
5
great.
books in that series. So yeah, I write a lot.
Definitely. And that's where, we don't typically do we're trying not to do writers' interviews and we try to just talk about the genre, but I think we'd be missing out on an opportunity if we didn't ask as writers ourselves any advice on how you write so much and how you to be a prolific author and kind of work through those series.
Well, I'm lucky that I don't work in the summers because I'm a chef at a sorority, and so this time of year I work, but I get 4 weeks off at Christmas. I get 16 weeks off in the summer, and it gives me a lot of time to write. And I have a very understanding wife who really pushes me on to do this kind of stuff.
Awesome.
Sometimes it's worked out, sometimes it hasn't. But I seem to think that I like to write things that I want to read. And if you never lose that, if you just write for yourself, you're going to do fine. It's when you get to the point where you're writing for other people and you're not quite sure where to go during the story because you're actually no longer writing for yourself. So my advice to you is to write what you love, and do it for yourself, and other people will fall in line and like it too.
I love that advice. I definitely need to hear that advice. I like that. I think sometimes there's a marketing game in my brain when I get that voice in my head that's like, all right, what should be the next thing I write? What do you think people are going to have the most eyeballs on? It's like, shut up. Like that voice needs to go away. The marketing guy needs to go away. And just the writer needs to come in and say, what do you want to write? So I really like that advice. I appreciate that. Thank you.
And I also give the advice that today you're a better writer than you were yesterday, and tomorrow you're going to be a better writer than you are today. So just read as much as you can. And we talked about audiobooks a few minutes ago, and I love listening to audiobooks because I'm more of a visual audio kind of guy, and I can pick up on things better through audiobooks than I can reading them. I can read books and 2 seconds later I have forgotten what I've read and have to go back a couple pages to try to find out. So audiobooks really help me, and some people are like that, I guess. And then try to keep books close by that that influence you, like this one.
Nice.
So,
thank you.
Because you're in a community now of other writers, and you should never feel like you can't ask advice from anybody, especially in the new pulp field. I have never met anybody in the new pulp field that's not willing to give assistance in some way.
That's awesome.
Yeah, the support from other writers is like if you haven't experienced that yet, I think you'd be a little shocked of like how open and kind writers are with being supportive. You included, Charles. Like any writer I've talked to, it's not been like discouraging even in the slightest. It's always arms open, bringing you into the community, helping you out, being supportive. So great advice. The community is something to take advantage of, and never feel afraid to reach out to a writer that you admire or that you read. That's great advice.
I've met many writers over the years, or people who wanted to be a writer because I'm going to write a book and I'm going to retire. Because I've written a book, and it's like, that's not how that works.
Yeah.
And honestly, you're not going to make a lot of money at it, but that's not what it's about. It's about telling the story. And I've had people tell me at the shows that I don't charge enough for my books. And it's like, I want people to read my stuff. I don't want to give it away. But I want to give them a chance to buy a book that's affordable enough for them. They don't know who I am. They're going to walk up to my table. Most likely they're going to walk away with a book because they bought something from an unknown author that's reasonably priced. You outprice yourself at your tables or online, you're less likely to get people to buy from you. At least that's my theory anyway.
Yeah, that makes sense.
You give a very fair shake with the there's like a box set you can get of like your Captain Hawklands for
you can get a
$10
ebook box set. Yeah, $10 for all of them.
Wow,
that's so cool. Yeah, something that Luke and I have talked about in previous episodes, and it would be really good to get your input on it since you have your finger on the pulse of the whole new pulp movement. How do you see this genre and kind of this whole like men's adventure fiction, pulp adventure, just pulp in general? How do you think that it's been replaced by the thriller, or do you think that there's still a place for it, and do you think that it is going to have a resurgence?
I think there's a place for it, and I think it's definitely going to have a resurgence. Pulp Fest this past August has had record number attendance, that biggest attendance I've ever had, and it's only going up. Hmm. And a lot of people ask me, well, what kind of convention is Pulp Fest? And I tell people it's a convention for old guys. But I was surprised that at the convention there were people in their 20s coming in and buying pulp stuff because they had discovered it somewhere, either through a relative or just by learning stuff online, and were buying pulp related items. So I think it's definitely going to have a resurgence. I think a lot of younger people are starting to catch on to some of this stuff that, and when I was a kid in the 1970s, the 1930s, 40s, there wasn't that big a gap in years, but now we're looking at almost 100 years gap, and people are starting to find their way back to it. And I think there will be a certain resurgence, but I think thrillers also have a place. I think they'll keep the genre alive mainstream, but I think it's the new pulp writers who are in the shadows, the small press guys like myself and like you guys, that are going to continue to put it out there.
Very
That's
cool.
Incredible. I'm so happy that Pulp Fest is growing, and I imagine you have a lot to do with that because you're definitely the reason I came this year. And my friend Jim, who was with me, same thing. So you definitely have a major role to play in that.
So we've been talking about pulp adventure and pulp stories and old pulp and new pulp, but I was curious, in your opinion, and I don't even know that I necessarily have an answer for this, but what makes a pulp story to you?
That's a good question, because you can write just about any kind of story and call it a pulp story. But I think at the heart of it is you want characters that can relate to your reader, but yet you want them to be able to live in a world of circumstance where they go against insurmountable odds. That's not the right word, but they go against odds that most people would die at the challenge, I guess. It's action adventure. It's getting in and out of situations quickly. It's giving your readers characters that they can relate to. I mean, that's really a hard question. I think
it's one that we wanted to do a whole episode on. So I'm putting you on the spot here. I'll admit
an easy thing to talk about.
Definitely a good question. And I think everybody would see pulp differently. Because you have, pulp can be Robin Hood. It can be, honestly, pulp can also be, you can kind of turn that a little bit. It can be Jane Austen. And because of the era that it's written in. The term pulp came from the cheap paper that the stories were printed on. But I think after a while, it just took a life of its own and became those action adventure stories, or the noir stories, detective stories, Maltese Falcon, that kind of thing. And that, that's about all I can say. I mean,
well, I think when you said the characters facing odds that other people would just die, that's like so true. It's like and that gets to the heart too of what we always love to talk about, is like, that's just what it's all about. You want to be that type of person who, when they see these insurmountable odds, they're like, I'm not going to run away. I'm going to choose. Yeah, you got it. You inspired me. Um, you choose to run at the challenge instead of away from it. And I think that's too, like I was saying earlier about Captain Hawkland. One of my favorite scenes is when he makes the wager against the sailor in one of the earlier books, when they're looking for the island of monsters, and he's like looking at this dude who's much bigger than him, and he's thinking like, man, I should not have done this. I'm about to get absolutely pummeled. But he just goes in swinging anyway. I think that cuts right to the heart of what pulp adventure and pulp stories in general are. It's like these guys know, these guys and gals, because there's a lot of great pulp adventure females, but they know that they're going up against something where they're just going to get punched right in the mouth, right? But they're not going to give up. So yeah, well said. That, I think that's going to end up being the intro clip for this episode. You knocked it out of the park with that.
Yeah, that was a great point. Just that larger than life aspect is what we want to see in those pulps, the men's adventure fiction, where it's not trying to be so gritty realism, but like you said, an ideal and somebody who faces against those odds. That was a great answer. So we'll probably come back to that when we do our full episode and examine like what is this. But for now, I wanted to ask you, as we wind things down, your very favorite book. Doesn't have to be pulp if it's not pulp, but just, you know, Charles F. Millhouse's favorite book. What is your go-to read?
If you can see that because of the Dune.
Dune?
Dune?
Oh, is that Dune?
Dune.
Nice.
Look at that version of Dune. That's wild.
Was that a first edition?
Yes.
That's so cool.
Crazy.
That's classic. Yes. That's my favorite book. I've read it almost every summer since high school, and I graduated high school in 1983.
That's incredible.
Either read it or I've listened to the audiobook version of it.
Yeah.
I just love Frank Herbert is a big inspiration for me. I wish I could write a tenth as well as he does. And I strive to be more like him as a writer. And I think, even though it's more science fiction or science fantasy than it is pulp, it still kind of falls in that, for me, it falls in that genre, which goes back to your question, what do you consider pulp? And I would think Dune is pulp, at least the first one.
Right. That's awesome. It's a hard book for me to read when they had like the glossary in the back. I lose track. I am not that smart. I am not that good at reading. Yeah, I was like, this is tough. I mean, Nathaniel knows I've struggled to read just science fiction in general. I think the concepts just like fly over my head. I got D's in science my whole life, so I'm just like not the guy. But yeah, I mean, same thing. When you said rereading, like First Blood is my favorite book, and yeah, it's for some reason every summer I just want to like reread it. I think that's so cool when you can have that relationship with a book, because imagine how you read it and see it differently as the years go by and as your life changes. And it's so cool to have a relationship with a book. I think everybody should have a book that they just read and read and read.
Yes, and you can read every time you read it, you find something new.
Yeah,
something hits you differently. Maybe something's going on in your life, and in some way that book relates to you.
That's so cool.
That's what I'm reading Dune every year, I think.
What did you think of the movies, by the way? I don't know. I saw the first one. I haven't seen the second one. Are they faithful to the book enough, or do you not care if they're too faithful and you still enjoy them, or what are your thoughts on the movie?
The two new movies that just recently came out, I really like them. Were they faithful to the book? They were probably 75% faithful to the book. They changed some of the characters, and they changed the ending so drastically that I cringed. But that's also because I've read the book so many times.
Yeah,
it's not to take away from those movies at all. If you've never read the book and watched that movie, you'll be fine. And I still watch it. I enjoy it. I think the performances are great. I think the guy that played Paul Moadib did an excellent job. Everybody did a really good job in it. It's just those couple little things that every time I watch it my wife hates it because I'm going, shouldn't have done it that way. So,
yeah, when you're too attached to a book, it gets tough watching the movies. I know if they made a Captain Hawkland movie, I'd be probably grinding my teeth at a few scenes. Like, you didn't do that right. Don't do that. Don't touch that.
how much money they hand me.
Which I actually had a question for you about Captain Hawkland specifically. So, do you have in your mind who you would like to cast as Captain Hawkland and Hardy and Oz?
Modern actors? No, I have no idea. I cast them with actors from the golden age of Hollywood.
Who is that then? Who are we
Um,
looking at?
Robert Mitchum as Captain Hawkland.
Okay.
And if you look at the Captain Hawkland and the Secrets of Monster Island, the artist kind of captured Robert Mitchum a little bit in the face.
That's so cool.
I would Jimmy Stewart as Hardy.
Nice.
Ernest Borgnine as Oz.
Oh, wow. Very cool.
And I think that's about as far as I got when it comes to just the three main characters. But Zane Carrington, to me, is still Billy Zane. So
Yeah.
even though it's old Hollywood, it's still Billy Zane.
Yeah, you're locked
totally
in.
see that.
That's so cool. And then one last question. We asked favorite book. Do you have a favorite character, kind of either in the genre or anywhere, just a favorite character in fiction?
Favorite character in the kitchen. Yeah, actually, it's actually one of my other books too that I like. I actually have it sitting here.
Man, you're prepared.
The Scarlet Pimpernel.
Nice.
There you
go. This is an excellent book. If you get a chance, if you find a copy or an ebook copy of The Scarlet Pimpernel, you will love this book. And this book's an old one. It doesn't have the date on the inside. It used to be a library book, but it was checked out in 1942.
Oh my goodness.
It's the date page, the stuff at the beginning tells you the date and the publisher and everything has been ripped out.
That's crazy.
So
that is a great
such
story.
Good condition too. Look at how good that
really
is.
Really good condition. Yeah.
And
very cool.
Is that the story that inspired Zorro? Is that the one that like kind of they said was? Am I thinking of the right thing in my head, or am I thinking of?
There's definitely a lot of parallels.
There are. Yes, definitely. Zorro was the inspiration for Batman,
right?
In a lot of ways. And actually, when I was at Pulp Fest, the guy who was in the table across from me had the first appearance of Zorro. And it's like I didn't even have enough money to look at it.
Oh my gosh.
But I didn't see very many Scarlet Pimpernel, and he's one of my favorite characters. And actually, the movie from 1934 is really good too.
Who's in that?
That was the.
Is it? It's not Douglas Fairbanks, right? Because he did Zorro.
Yeah, he did Zorro. The guy who played Scarlet Pimpernel played in Gone with the Wind also. Who? His name.
It's not Clark Gable, right?
No.
It was just a different character.
Yeah. I can't remember his name off the top of my head.
That's okay. If it wasn't Clark Gable or Douglas Fairbanks, I don't think I would have known him. But very cool. Yeah, that's great.
So then to end things off, just a general, we like to give book recommendations. People are always asking for that. So what is just a general book recommendation you have that you think people should read? Maybe something you read recently, something that you're into right now.
You told me in the text to be prepared, so I am. Traitor's Blade by Sebastian de Castiel. This also is a book that's written in first person, and it's basically about the Greycoats, and it's basically the Three Musketeers, but in a fantasy world. There's 5 books in the series. This is the first book, and this is my favorite of the series. And it's a highly recommended Traitor's Blade.
Very cool.
This is so wild. I've been looking for that book for years now. I heard a YouTube video recommend that book to me, and I heard the plot, and I forgot about it, didn't write it down, couldn't find the video, and I've been thinking about it every so often. And this summer, especially when I was into Zorro, I was like,
no way.
Book. Yes. I was like, what was that book that they said was like the Three Musketeers, but it's like a modern fantasy series a little bit? And I was like, I don't know. There it is. Look at that.
Blade, yep.
That's amazing.
stumbled across this at the bookstore, and I read the first page, and I said, "Yep, I'm buying it," and I've been hooked ever since.
Oh, wow. I got to buy that immediately. That's the one I've been looking for. That's so cool.
Me too.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Nathaniel, how about you? Any book recommendations?
Yeah, so this actually is a shout out to one of the people who commented. It was on the One Man Army video that we did. His name's Ryan, and he said to check out the Snow series by Bobby Nash. And you wrote a short story, right, for him?
I did.
Yeah,
I did. I wrote. It's called Snow Heart. Yeah.
I actually just I had that. I have a library app called Hoopla that gives me access to audiobooks to listen to, and I had that favorited for a long time now. And then like 10 days ago, this guy commented that. I was like, oh my gosh, that's been on my radar for so long. And so then when I saw that you had written one, I was like, all right, I know Captain Hochland's got this pulp adventure aspect to him. Let's try these ones on, and they're phenomenal stories. They're very fun. I haven't read a ton of them yet, but I really enjoy the Snow series by Bobby Nash. So
Snowstorm is the first one in the set, and it's really good. Bobby Nash.
Cool.
He also came out with this recently. It's a volume 1 of the first 3 books in his Tom Myers mystery series.
Okay, cool.
And I just got done reading this, and these are really good.
Awesome.
And Bobby's a really good writer, and I've never met him, but we've become really good friends online. He has helped me out a lot. Or actually, he's got a, and I recommend having him on your show. He has a character called Lance Starr, and we've done some Lance Starr Captain Hochland team ups. Now we're talking about doing a novel together.
Oh, that's so cool.
So,
yeah, I'll definitely have to check that out. Because I was reading Bobby Nash, I was like, wow, this really does have a lot of like pulp DNA. Because back to the question we were talking about earlier, what is pulp adventure? I think you know it when you see it for sure. It's hard to describe, but you're reading something or watching something, you're like, yeah, this is what I'm here for. Like, this is what it's all about. So listening to those Snow stories were very cool. But yeah,
the thing about Bobby Nash is he knew nothing about pulp fiction when he was approached to write pulp fiction. He was approached by Ron Fortier, who runs Airship 27. It's a small press from out west, and he approached Bobby Nash to write pulp, and he said, "Yeah, I'll do it, but what's pulp?" So yeah,
crazy.
Yeah, and he just took to it, like awesome. He's been writing it all his life.
That's awesome.
Wow. Great story.
Now, what about you, Luke? You got a recommendation for us?
Yeah, I'm gonna put 2 out there. I'm going a little different, not necessarily again pulp. What is it? Maybe some of these would fall into it, but I'm going with The Contender by Robert Lipsyte, because this was like one of the earliest books to get me into reading, and it's a boxing novel, and I wish there were more boxing novels. And boxing was like a big pulp thing. So like Ace Doubles, I got this one, Knock 'em Dead. So nice. The Contender has a little bit of DNA of the pulps, but it's a great sort of boxing story about a young kid learning to control his like emotions and his behaviors and kind of get into the right frame of mind to live a good life. And the sequel blew me away. So if you read the first one, you pick up the second one, it's not a twist ending, it's a twist sequel, and you'll read about the first character in a different light. It's really, really cool. Yeah, and then the other one I wanted to show is Mark Cameron's Open Carry, just because I mentioned this on my own YouTube channel this week. I forgot about this book, and because the newest book in the series just came out, but Arliss Cutter, that Mark Cameron writes, Open Carry is the first one. This series, to me, this is why I asked the question, like, couldn't these fall into pulps? Like, this guy's a tracker, and it's a thriller, but it's written in just like my favorite writing style. It's kind of a mix of like Hemingway or like Lester Dent even, and it's in like a modern thriller. It's great. I think people, if you enjoy what we're talking about here, you'll love the Mark Cameron novels, his Arliss Cutter stuff in particular.
Very cool.
You like boxing stories. Have you read any of the Robert E. Howard boxing stories?
No, I've been recommended them. I need to find like an anthology either on Amazon or some in my local bookstore. Like I want to read some. I read 1 or 2 PDF style on my like computer, but I would like to physically get one of his collections.
That Steve Costigan specifically are all his boxing stories, or does he have others as well?
Sure.
I think the Iron Man is like his collection of a lot of boxing stories. I think.
Okay, cool.
It's called the Iron Man, and I don't know if those are all the Sailor Steve Costigan. Is that the one?
Yeah, I think
that does have a lot of boxing.
I may be wrong about that, but yeah, I think he's like a boxer, but also, well, a sailor, but also like he always ends up in a situation where he has to box his way out of stuff. So
he's one of the ones I read. One of his short stories where they like met up in a pit and boxed each other over like a girl, and then neither of them got the girl. It was like they like went to the bar and like neither of them got her. So it was pretty fun. But yeah, this has been fun. And Charles, thank you so much for giving us your time and coming on here. This was
you had me on here. Yes,
absolute I enjoyed it. Pleasure. And go ahead, Nathaniel.
You've been a great supporter of the podcast since day one. So thank you so much for being invested in this, and then not only being invested in it by just sharing on social media, but actually coming on here and giving your time to be with us. It's an honor, and it's so cool to see the man behind these great stories that we've really been enjoying, and that when we did our Indiana Jones episode, this is some stuff that's very like it scratches that Indiana Jones itch. So I really appreciate, and it's like you said, keep writing stuff that you want to read, and so then it's so cool to read stuff that like is the sort of stuff I want to write. So thank you for getting into my mind and writing these stories for me. I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I have to say. Oh, go ahead. Were you going to say something? I don't want to cut you off. I just wanted to like personally thank you for this book in particular. This was the first Captain Hochland I picked up, and just going back to what you said about the characters that you showed and like the vulnerability. I was not doing well mentally in the time I picked this up. I was very like in a low spot last winter, and I just like was struggling a little bit with depression. And this series really did help me out. And like just seeing a hero and an ideal who could fight through those things himself, that really did help me. So I just wanted to give you a personal thank you that like it's always what I'm talking about. It's like these pulps really do inspire me and help me, and this series in particular this winter.
Well, I'm glad I could help in some small way. I know about depression a little bit. I struggle with it too, and writing really helps me combat that. I refuse to take a medication for it, and if I don't write for a while, my wife will say, "You haven't written for a few days. Go write something." So that's my medicine, and hopefully, putting that into Captain Hochland and the Ghost Army, from my depression into that helped your depression. So
yeah, this was my medicine this winter. It was great. It really did help. I appreciate you for that. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
And thank you guys all for watching and enjoying and commenting and liking and building this community and helping me and Nathaniel at least find some great books, you know what I mean, and some great friends. It's been awesome. So we really, really do appreciate you.
Yeah, Charles, do you want to tell everyone where they can find you on social media, on the internet, on wherever you are? You can. We'll link it in the bottom, but if you want to give a little overview for us.
Sure, you can find me on all social medias except for X. I left that place a long time ago. And you can find me under the username Writer Millhouse.
Cool.
Mostly been hanging out more on Instagram than I have anything. I still do Facebook from time to time, and I'm on Threads, but Instagram is the one where you'll find me the most. Mm-hmm. Or if you want to go, I have two websites. I have a website, stormgatepress.com, which is an overview of all of my publishing works. Or if you're more interested in the Captain Hochland, you can go to choosetheadventure.net, and that's all Captain Hochland related, Zane Carrington, that kind of stuff.
Awesome.
Fantastic. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Take care, guys.